Do you see that? Don't worry. As incredible as it may seem, this guy is fine, although you saw what happened with your own eyes. A man was sucked into a jet engine. This happened during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Early on the morning of February 20th, the A6E Intruder was being prepared for takeoff. A 21-year-old John Bridges from the maintenance crew was dangerously close to death. In an instant, the guy was sucked into the air intake of a jet engine, which ripped off his goggles, float coat, helmet, and also tools from his hands. These are important details, because this stuff hit the engine first, causing a huge explosion and saving Bridges' life. When something other than air, but not very solid, gets into a jet turbine, it usually gets shredded into slime immediately. The blades work like huge titanium knives that spin at 1,000 to 20,000 RPM. It's like a giant blender, but with one difference. Its blades are not designed to shred something. That's why when objects that hit the engine first damaged it, the pilot immediately felt this and cut the engine. But for a whole 3 minutes while systems were shutting down, the poor guy was on the verge of death. The most surprising thing is that Bridges walked away from the incident with a broken collarbone, a blown eardrum, and some cuts. And that's it. Few people who find themselves in this situation got so lucky. Frankly, in a fight between a really big, super powerful jet engine and a human, only the engine can win. First, it has fast blades that shred everything relatively soft into pieces. One row of blades is followed by another, smaller in size, so the pieces of the body are cut to even smaller pieces. Eventually, what used to be the human body turns into biological goo and enters the combustion chamber. The engine will flicker slightly as the remains mix with the fuel, but everything happens so fast that nothing will malfunction. As a result, gaseous human particles will fly out through the nozzle. The end. Fortunately, as I said, the blades in the engine are not designed to shred someone. As soon as some foreign object gets into the engine, it'll most likely either work less efficient or even stall. Though this will hardly become any consolation to a person if they are this foreign object. To be honest, I doubt that in such a situation there can be something that can console them. To eliminate any chance this would happen, warning signs are painted on the engine nacelles. Nacelles are like hard covers for engines, part of the skin of an aircraft. I think you already realize that. Usually there are several warnings, just to be sure. The personnel should not approach the front of the engine that's running or could possibly be running. That is, if the engine is about to turn on, it's better to stay away. The safest distance is 33 feet, both from the front and from the side of any engine. The back of an engine is also a danger zone. You can be blown away by a stream of air. A large aircraft with a jet engine can generate wind speeds up to 118 miles an hour, as far away as 197 feet. You may also be hit by some small debris. And yet the most dangerous area is in the front of the engine. Because when it turns on, not only a person can get sucked in. I'm serious. In 2009, a Boeing 747 tried to suck one of the baggage carts into its engine. As you realize, that's a hefty metal contraption, but it was sucked into the engine, seemingly very quickly. Perhaps at this moment, you, like me, are wondering if some objects, or even worse, people, are constantly at risk of getting sucked into the blades of a jet engine. Maybe they should be somehow protected. I don't know, with a screen? Kind of like a filter and a vacuum cleaner, only a gigantic one? Moreover, planes often collide with birds, and birds get into the engines. The simplest example, the events that inspired the movie Sully. But if you look into the matter, you'll see that a screen will cause much more damage than a bird. It's simple. In order for the protective screen to withstand the collision with the bird, it must weigh a lot. And when something weighs a lot, it's impossible to control it. While the bird simply causes failure of the engine, the heavy structure that broke away will surely result in an explosion. Well, or it'll get stuck, like that baggage cart. And in this state, no plane will fly anywhere. In short, the bird is not the worst thing that could happen. But don't think the aircraft companies are simply ignoring the threat of collision with birds. There's even a special device to test the aircraft, and it's called a chicken cannon. This is really a cannon that runs on compressed air, and instead of shells, it shoots the carcasses of birds of different weights. The first device was built back in 1942, but aircraft change and cannons change with them. Feathered shells usually hit the most crucial elements of the aircraft: the wings, the tail section, running engines. And yes, people actually still use dead birds for this. Whole birds with feathers, tails, heads, and legs. These shells are purchased at poultry farms and from companies that need to dispose of dead birds. Most often, of course, they choose chickens. They're affordable and always available. Although, let's be honest, the very thought of someone shooting chicken carcasses at planes seems kind of absurd and very outdated. We're living in the 21st century. Is there a more humane way? Turns out there is. There are various bird dummies, usually made of silicone. This silicone imitates bird muscles, and plastic filler balls inside simulate the skeleton and innards. The dummy bird's easy to store, and test residue is easy to clean up. The only problem seems to be the cost. By the way, they also shoot chickens at windshields of aircraft to test their strength. But these tests are designed for some kind of outside impact. But the windshield can fall out from the inside. In June 1990, a British Airways aircraft was on its way from Birmingham to Malaga when 2 of the 6 windshields in the cockpit suddenly blew out due to poor fastening, almost taking the pilot of the plane, Tim Lancaster, with them. He was torn off his seat at a height of 23,000 feet. Incredibly enough, flight attendant Nigel Ogden managed to rush into the cockpit and grab the pilot's legs. The seatbelt didn't help. The autopilot disengaged, and the plane was practically flying to its doom at almost 400 miles per hour. Mr. Ogden gradually slipped out of the window, holding on to the pilot, but fortunately the second flight attendant, John Heward, ran into the cockpit and grabbed him by the belt. The 87 people on board the plane were in mortal danger when the co-pilot took control and another flight attendant helped hold this chain of men. All this happened in 15 minutes. That lasted for an eternity. The plane landed at Southampton Airport. Believe it or not, the pilot suffered several fractures, frostbite, but survived. Moreover, after he recovered, he resumed his duties as a pilot. As incredible as this story seems, it actually happened. However, there's another, no less fantastic story that happened in 2008. The plane, flying over the state of Florida, collided with something at an altitude of 1,500 feet. Something damaged the wing of the plane and led to an emergency landing. It was necessary to find out what was the reason, and so the remains of the alleged bird were delivered to the lab. Well, not much of the remains, more like a smear of blood, fat, and microscopic bits of feathers that look like snot, but it's good enough for DNA analysis. Now, imagine the surprise of scientists when it turned out that it was the DNA of deer. I mean, a real one. The sample was checked 3 times, and each time the result was a white-tailed deer. Not even a reindeer, so Santa definitely had nothing to do with it. In the end, the frustrated scientists asked feather experts for help. These guys have their own bird recognition system. If you're interested, I'll tell you more about it some other time. Well, these experts studied a pile of snot and found a tiny piece of feather there, which matched up perfectly with a black vulture. The vulture who apparently ate a deer carcass and then collided with the plane and confused scientists. It's a pity there were no flying deer involved. Can you imagine what a breakthrough in science that'd be? But okay, Christmas is still a long way off, so let's get back to the planes. Can you imagine the Boeing 727 crash test? Without any chicken cannons and other half measures, a real test, like with a car. On April 27, 2012, such an experiment was conducted in Mexico. An unmanned Boeing with a bunch of cameras, crash test dummies, and scientific instruments crashed into the ground. By agreement with the local authorities, part of the flight had to be controlled by people. So on board the Boeing, which was supposed to crash for scientific purposes, there were 3 actual crew members and 3 paratroopers for support. All of them left the plane in time, with the pilot, of course, being the last to do so, just 3 minutes before the collision. The aircraft crashed into the ground at a speed of 140 miles per hour and broke into several pieces. No one, except the dummies, got hurt. With the help of a crash test, they determined the safest places on the plane and other similar stuff that you probably know already. But here's what surprised me. That wasn't the only test like that. True, for the sake of science, they usually crash old planes, the service life of which had already come to an end. For example, on December 1, 1984, NASA crashed a Boeing 720 in the Mojave Desert. Dummies participated here as well. Scientists also tested firefighting performance and the likelihood that people could find a way out even through thick smoke. Listen, I keep talking about dummies, But the very first dummy for aviation crash tests was a living person. Dr. John Stopp, an Air Force surgeon, participated in tests to find out the effects of extreme acceleration and deceleration on the human body. This was really important. In the 1950s, they'd just begun to seriously think about the safest way to save the lives of pilots. Stopp got into the rocket sled and was able to accelerate to speeds over 632 miles per hour in just 5 seconds. He experienced about 20 G, a lot for a human. When the sled came to a halt in just 1.4 seconds, Stopp was hit with the force that's equivalent to 46.2 G. His ribs and apparently his wrists were broken. The capillaries in his eyes burst and the retina of his eyes detached. The doctor went blind. Luckily, the next day his vision returned. Of course, there were other volunteers besides him, but it's John Stopp who's considered the fastest man in the world. I have no doubts he deserved this title. Today, it's hard to imagine that a person would willingly expose themselves to such a mortal danger for scientific purposes. Not a living person, that is. Yet it sounds a bit creepy and even disgusting, but the people who donated their bodies to science really served this very science in the most unexpected ways, including participating in a variety of crash tests. And you know what? The dead actually save our lives. We'll see you later.